Alrighty. Hey gang. Welcome back, you guys. Another episode of Stove Chat. Matt here, as always. How are you guys? How's it going out there in the world? Hope you guys are having a great day. Happy Wednesday, everybody. So, hey, Belgian Gulch. All right. Glad you're here. Glad you could make it today, my friend. Wonderful, wonderful. Hope the stream is streaming good for you guys. I got a good status on my stream, so looks like we're up and running. So, yeah, how are you guys? You have a good week? Tall Shadow. All right. Yeah, right on. Glad you're here. I'm looking forward to it, too. Hopefully you guys had a good week. You guys have been thinking about stoves, building stoves, collecting firewood, staying safe. Belgian Gulch, I'm wondering about fire season, since your fire season is sort of what wrecks my summer every every summer, at least these last few. It didn't used to be every summer. Hey, Doug, good to see you, man. Glad you made it. I'm kind of wondering about forest fires this summer, and wondering if that's started to kick off over there where you are. We've had pretty moist June here. I think on the east side there you probably have too. Just kind of wondering if you've had any forest fires yet. I keep sniffing the air, waiting to see if it's coming, but so far so good. I wonder if less people run around in the woods is going to make us have less fires. We'll see. So, hey, Robin, right on. Welcome. Well, I'm so glad to have all you guys here. Thanks so much for showing up, you guys. So, what should we talk about? Really wet and green right now, says Belgian Gulch. All right, cool. Glad to hear it. I know last year we had some real early ones. It seemed like it kicked off really early, so I was just kind of wondering about how things were building up over there. Not hoping that we don't have another smoky summer. So, anyways, how are you guys? What should we talk about? I've got a couple things in mind, a couple stuff I've been thinking about. Super hot and dry in New England, says Doug. Yeah, Doug, it seems like when we are getting our moist, cool onshore flow, that usually seems to bring you guys the hot weather, and then it seems like it's the opposite. As soon as we get hot, high pressure, then you guys get that cold air coming from down north, coming down from the north. Seems like across the continent. That isn't always how it goes, but in general. So hey, Augustus, welcome. Glad to see you, man. You're welcome. Thank you for appreciating them. I'm sure enjoying them. I really appreciate all you guys. I could say right back to you guys. Thank you all for being here. Really makes a difference to me. Having people to talk to. I've actually really been enthused about stoves and the channel and our community and all that since starting this. It's so much more rewarding for me to be able to talk to you guys than it is to sit here and teach a lesson like in a video. Those are just not as much. Yeah, they're not as rewarding for me. So this is great. Really appreciate you guys being here. Positive aspect, that means you too. Thanks for being here. Good to see ya. Two Trance, been a while. Nice to see you, my friend. Tall Shadows getting thunderstorms. It's about that time of year, isn't it? But that is fire starting too. So hopefully not. Yeah, good to see all you guys. So let's see. I got some great questions, by the way, via email from all of you, actually, just about, and I really appreciate them, you guys. Thank you so much for sending them along. So I'll do my best to get to all of them. If I don't, if I didn't cover something that you wanted me to cover, please speak up in the chat. So first and foremost, positive aspect. I think I wanted to just touch base on. I think it was one of your questions. And it was really about the overfueling. Oh no, Doug, that was your question. I'm sorry. Doug asked, when we're talking about overfueling, he says, is there a way to know if you're overfueling other than going outside and seeing the smoke or a testo? And my answer is really that there isn't, as far as I know. And really, even the testo does show it, but it's not a subtle. This isn't like creeping up on ultimate efficiency, which the testo, is imperative when you're trying to tell if you're burning at 72 or 78 or 83 or whatever efficiency in those ranges. Overfueling is just a really, really starkly bad, starkly obvious negative, profoundly negative condition that's really obvious when you can see the chimney. But from the front end, which you alluded to, you said, I don't think this is what you're going to be able to see anything from the front. And you're absolutely right. I don't think you're going to notice it in the firebox. And the behavior that you would assume is overfueling is really the same behavior that's going to get you the very best condition, or the very best test run from a testo. This is why I always talk about Peter as being a drag racer and how brave he is, because in order to get those really high efficiency numbers, he's running just right on the, I mean, the razor thin line of toppling over out of control into overfueling. So it's really a breaking point. It happens instantly. It's not something that you creep up on and you kind of sneak into. You're either all the way there and you just blew past your excess air and now you've got smoke, or you're burning at your peak efficiency. So you know what I'm trying to say is, when it's in the firebox, what Peter's test burns look like, they look like there's no way they wouldn't be overfueled. They're tiny kindling, they're dry birch, they're burning crazy hot. I mean, they are rockets. And so when I first saw that, I was like, no way is he going to get good numbers out of this. You know, he's blowing this thing up. And that's how you get the best numbers. And none of us burn that way in normal burning either. So this is why I always kind of take the numbers with a little bit of grain of salt. And they're important. It's important to have a core that's capable of it. But at the same time, when people talk about the big difference between box stoves and rocket mass heaters, I don't hold that point of view personally. I think the best box stoves are about on par with a average good rocket mass heater. I think the best rocket mass heater will exceed the best wood stove, but in terms of people's day-to-day burning, I'm not of the mind that there's that giant of a difference for most people. And it's because of that. So that's going back to overfueling, and let me just get back to that. So is there a way to know? There really isn't. The only way to know is to look at your chimney. And the good news is that if your stove's built well and you are consistently using kind of the same fuel, you'll learn. You'll have some of your own fuel can cause overfueling if it's cut small or, too dry. If you've got too much draft, like it's wicked cold outside and it's just pulling air in super fast, you'll start to learn. But you really just have to go outside and look when you're getting the hang of burning things. And what'll happen is you'll get a load going crazy hot and you'll be like, oh man, I'm about to burn the house down. And you'll go outside to check and it's perfect, crystal clear, little heat waves coming out of the chimney. That's when you start to get your confidence and go, okay, right, these things are made to burn super hot. So you won't be so scared of overfueling, and you shouldn't be. A well-designed rocket stove should be really difficult to overfuel for the most part. With that said, that is why I got kind of discouraged by the heavy fire brick batch boxes, the standard batch made out of heavy fire brick, because by the time you're on your second or third load, the residual heat from the bricks in the firebox just flashes all of your wood off right when you put it in. And that's kind of the worst overfueling in rocket stoves. Typically is that initial flare off in a hotly reloaded batch or something like that. And it's a big reason why I went to the insulated fireboxes, so I could get consistent burn rates with loads on top of loads on top of loads. So hey, Carpenter family, nice to see ya. So hopefully that makes sense. Belgian Gulch says fire looks good in the box, clouds of black smoke at the stack. That's really it, Belgian Gulch. That's the best way to be able to tell if you're overfueled, Doug. So hopefully that helps. Moving on from there, it was here we go. So this question is about the weight of a mass stove, and this is from, I think, Positive Aspect, I believe, and he's talking about how I was saying in an earlier video that if you build a rocket stove without mass, you'll be disappointed. And he's kind of wondering, where's the split on that? At what point does a rocket stove really need mass to be efficient? Or box stove, where does it break? So let me go back to to the chat real quick and catch up with your questions. So Belgian gulches burn less large. Yeah, that's the fix. That's funny. I was thinking of you as I was talking about Peter loading his stoves, Belgian gulch, because large is exactly right. Like just almost a guaranteed overfuel. So you just got to play with your fuel. For me, like I'll mix my fir with my alder, so I don't just have a bunch of really dry fir in there. So Tall Shadow says, so real life efficiency is really like 70 to 80% without the risk of overfueling. Well, that's it. I wouldn't put a blanket statement on that, Tall Shadow. What I would say is just that most of us, just normal burning, we're not usually pushing that close to overfueling, and we're definitely not doing it like as a goal. Which is what you're doing with a test run. You're trying to get that peak efficiency, so you're trying to get as close to stoichiometric, the perfect balance of air and fuel. You're trying to get as close to that as you possibly can, and so in order to do that, you're just right at the edge of overfueling. Since we don't always burn that way, you're always going to be somewhere underneath that peak number. In other words, if we tell you Peter's core tests at 92%, you can bet that most of the time you're burning, you're significantly under that number. It doesn't mean you're, way under it, but I don't know where that number is. So I would say, if I had to guess, I would say yes, real life efficiency is 70 or 80%, which is, box stoves, they put those same numbers on them, but again, those are their peaks, so they're probably more like 50 coming up to 70 or 80. So, don't take it the wrong way. I definitely believe in the efficiency of rocket stoves, but I know that there's some great box stoves out there because I've seen them. I was there with the testing machines and the testers and the designers in Washington D.C., watching them all be burned and tested side by side. And there are some box stoves that will give our stoves a run for the money. So that's just, it's important, because we have some loud champions of our technology that maybe aren't always 100%, on the side of accurate information as much as they are on the side of encouraging enthusiasm, which is fine. So I just feel like it's important to temper that with a little bit of reality and just say there's some other stuff out there. So about the mass. Thank you for bringing me back to that, Augustus, and positive aspect. Thanks for the great question. So the question is, so this is a really, really good one to cover, and I probably won't have a satisfactory answer for you, but the discussion will be valuable because I get this a lot from, it's almost always going to be from people who are new to the idea of mass heaters and rocket stoves. They've read, it's their first introduction to rocket stoves. It probably was about an enthusiastic encourager that I just talked about, who made them think that their life has been sorely lacking up until this point without a rocket stove, which I agree, and I felt that way too. But I'll get a lot of these emails. People emailing me about the plans and saying, I have an RV, I have a bus, I have a tiny home on wheels, I have any number of reasons why I don't want mass. But I'd love a rocket mass heater. They don't really know that. They just say rocket stove. And so, you guys, for the most part, Stove Chat folks, are going to understand that a rocket mass heater, we just talked about what makes it, where its efficient burn is. And it's at the peak burn rate, right? Like a rocket mass heater is efficient because it's just blasting. It's so close to stoichiometric, as close as you can get to a stoichiometric burn as possible, meaning it's running full tilt. No burn reduction, no choking, no damping. It's just going full tilt and getting as much heat out of the fuel as possible. It's going to do that in a very short time due to the nature of the burn. Loud champions, yes. So, that's a rocket stove. We're going to get the maximum amount of fuel energy out of the wood, and it's going to take a very short time to do it. Now, interesting side note, that's exactly why we can't get through EPA testing, because at least in this country, the stipulations for testing have time parameters for each stage of testing, and a rocket stove just burns too fast to even make it past stage 1. So that's a rocket stove for you. When they're burning correctly, they're burning quickly. So now back to the question. Where's the line for a rocket stove with mass and a rocket stove without mass. When does it make sense? And there's no right answer because it really comes down to your goals. So if you are in a hunting blind, let's say, and you show up there, you walk out to your blind, it's always there, and you just want to sit in there and heat that thing up in as soon as you can and just have a little bit of heat radiate into the room quickly, and you're not going to be there for more than an hour or so, then a rocket mass heater makes a great, super efficient little space heater. You could have it like my old Walker stoves, the original ones with just the metal bell, and it could just heat up the space via convection through the radiating heat of the bell. So that's kind of a no mass rocket mass heater. There's a lot of places where those are, where those are useful. Cooking, anything that you're trying to heat up quickly, but you don't care about residual heat. And honestly, that's about it. I don't think that that it makes really any sense at all to do a low mass heater for trying to heat a space for any extended period of time. It's only useful if you want a quick startup and you only need that heat to blast into that space or into something you're going to store it in. You're going to store it in some mass. You're going to store it in some water. A sauna is a great example, Doug. It's a perfect example, as a matter of fact, because you will have rocks there in the sauna, right? You do have some mass. It's part of the system. So I apologize if I end up at the end of this question being slightly annoyed just with myself more than anything, but just kind of like, because I come around to it, I'm just like, there isn't really a way to get from here to there. Is that there's a lot of really good things you can do with quick, efficient heat from fuel that a rocket stove does. I think that one of the best things to do is store that heat, whether it's in water or masonry or whatever, and use it timed release over time. If you don't have that feature, though, the rocket stove isn't going to do you much good. Now, a box stove, your little box stove that you had in your house or your cabin, when you wanted quick heat out of it, what would you do? You'd put wood in there and you just let it shoot flame up the chimney, right? Like just blast off and try and get heat into the room. So at that point, it's really operating like a rocket stove. You're using it like a rocket stove. What changes is when you want that other function. You want that long burn. And what do? You shut down the air on your wood stove and you smolder the wood in there, just simmering smoke out of the chimney, and you get a long, slow burn. Now, we just accept that in a box stove, right? We're like, that's just what you do. It's how it works. You get these 8-hour burns. It's great. You're doing it, there's some exceptions. Now, this is the traditional box stoves, not the modern ones, but the traditional box stoves, that's the only thing you could do. So a rocket stove, kind of the same deal. We all know that we're burning it to be efficient, so we're only going to burn it hot. I mean, if you really want it to, you can smolder wood in a rocket stove just like you can smolder wood in a real stove. It's a horrible idea. It's terrible practice. It's just that in the box stove, it's our cultural norm because we've done it for millennia, right? So I don't know if there's an answer at the end of that whole diatribe, but really what it comes down to is that I feel like the best way to burn wood is burn it hot and fast to be as efficient as possible. I'm always going to try and find a method to make that work for my application, whether it's barbecuing, I use my brick oven to store some of that heat and stabilize temperatures. When it's grilling, I'll just have the flame come right up underneath the meat. You know what I'm saying? You have to use the tool for the application in the way that it serves it best. And to me, that's a rocket stove with mass. You can heat with a smoldering fire as well, and you can do it in a box stove, or you could do it in a rocket stove if you wanted to. I hate to say it. So there's the answer. The answer is really, I guess, to follow that thread all the way through, the answer is that I don't think a no-mass wood-burning heater of any sort really makes a whole lot of sense. How about that? And if you live somewhere where you can't have mass, or if you're in a situation where you can't have mass, you just need to accept that. Like little wood-fired solid fuel heaters in a boat or in an RV, they're just not going to keep you warm overnight. You just have to realize that. And if your home is the same, if you're like on a second story and you just can't get the weight up there, you probably need to accept that as well. Now, there's things you can do. You can move the weight somewhere else. If you use that heater as like a small brick space heater with a very small amount of weight with an internal water coil, then you could put a water heating tank off site, somewhere else. And then you could bring that mass, that circling water back to your radiators in your rooms. So, there are things that you can do. But really that's it. In my opinion is that there's some applications that you just have to make those compromises and say, I don't have mass. What am I going to do? It's my RV. I'm going to choose propane. I hate to say it. I've been on a sailboat with a small solid fuel heater. It was terrifying. The chimney turns bright red. The entire cabin of the boat feels like it's going to catch on fire for about 20 minutes. You spend half an hour being terrified and hot, and then in 45 minutes you're cold again. And I just think there's better choices when you get to the point where mass is not an option. So that was kind of a long diatribe showing you the inner workings of some of my bias there. I hope that was helpful in some ways. Are you guys still here? Did I scare y'all off? I didn't get... Always Learning says add and subtract mass as needed. That's exactly right. So let's see. So another question, and this one was from Doug as well, and this is asking about half-inch CFB. And Doug, I'm glad you asked. I wanted to let you guys know that I don't think half-inch CFB is really much use anywhere, with the exception of if you were going to okay, glad Belgian Gulch, glad to hear it, thank you. Unless you're going to sandwich it somewhere where it serves no structural function, it's simply insulation, then it's fine. But my feeling is if you're going to do that, you might as well just use like the much less expensive and easier to source ceramic wool in between, two layers. And the reason I say that is because the 1 inch, we all know that the CFB is relatively fragile. And some is more fragile than others. So apparently some people get boards and they are really fluffy and soft. Most of the boards I get are pretty firm and rigid, and once cured, they're really quite rigid. But they're not very durable in terms of abrasion, and they can be structural. They can hold up some weight, but not a ton. But the half-inch CFB is it's very fragile. It has most of the same properties, but it's so thin that it just it'll break, it'll wear. There's not much there. So Augustus says, in my area, CF blanket is a quarter the price of CF board. Is there something like concrete backer board that can withstand the heat and be structural, but not necessarily insulate? Yeah, it's a good question, Augustus, and it's a challenge. It really depends on where in the stove that we're talking about. I've used concrete backer board with some success and some failure. So I like it in places where it's like a skin. If it's in the combustion core, the backer board will just turn into crumbles. So anywhere kind of close to the riser, even a little ways past the riser, it doesn't seem like it holds up. But I'm going to say it's peak working temp, and this is just totally out of my butt, so don't quote me on this. But from my experience, it seems like sustained temps over 300 degrees or so, and it starts to break down. So prototyping is a little pricey, yes, Augustus. My feelings with prototyping, I did a lot of casting back in the day. You can cast with crappy materials like just concrete and perlite, and it'll get you enough to see if it's going to work. You can get through the first half dozen burns or so. Bricks are great, but they don't allow a lot of, tricky details. That's the one thing nice about casting. You can really... I actually was just looking at some old casting photos of mine. Maybe I'll bring them up on one of these casts. And you can do some really cool stuff, but it's... Yeah, so prototyping with CFB is expensive. It's true, because once you cut those boards, you can't stick them back together. It's sort of the age-old challenge. so going back to years ago, my old permsteading board, we had a fellow there, and I don't remember his username, but he did these awesome prototypes, and these go back to a question that Tall Shadow and Belgian Gulch, I think you sent me a little hint of what you guys had been doing with your new riser stuff. And I had remembered that this fella was building entire stoves. We were really, at that point, I was just starting to work with the CFB raw, and he was playing with the wool raw, and he was saying, so what role does the outer skin play? Can we just use the wool? And he was building these J's that were basically built out of contractor's cloth, like wire mesh. And then the wire mesh was just the skeleton, and then he would line them with ceramic wool, and he would build entire working cores using just that method. So this is going back to your prototyping question, Augustus. And that actually is a reasonable way to prototype. It's difficult to get really precise shapes and measurements, but you can certainly do fireboxes and different throats and ports and risers and stuff like that. So in other words, you understand, right? He basically just took, like, you could even use chicken wire. He used heavier duty stuff than that, but it didn't matter. It was just, all that is the shape. So just something that will hold the shape and then line it with the ceramic wool, just like we do the 5-minute riser. But he did that throughout his whole core, and you can do some pretty cool prototyping that way. So maybe that will help. So I'm going to come back up here, and Positive Aspect says, a few minutes behind as I went into the kitchen, I had a 3-room masonry heater on a 2nd floor in Germany. Yeah. So that's one of the things about our rocket mass heaters that is important for us to remember, that we are trying to, for the most part, we're staying within this format of DIY, something that's reasonable for people to retrofit into an existing home, something that most people could build maybe on their own, and something that doesn't cost, we're all, I'm sure, in different categories there. So something that's accessible to most people. And it's one of the biggest questions I get when people ask about my plans. They say, what's the big difference between your heater and a masonry heater? And I say, well, my heaters are masonry heaters, but they're just, in terms of scale, they're going to be considerably smaller than, like Positive Aspect describes, a 3-room masonry heater on a 2nd floor. I think he means maybe he did 3 rooms. But at any rate, most masonry heaters are just enormous, right? The traditional European masonry heater like we see on the East Coast, they're just absolutely massive. And so it's important to remember that we are using smaller mass, and so our goals should be smaller as well. So Positive Aspect says we get CFB in flame facing and non-flame facing, so be careful what you're buying. Non-flame facing is much cheaper. I don't know if we get that, Positive Aspect. I haven't seen that terminology here. Always Learning says cold climates need 24/7 long-term heat storage using greater mass. Moderate or fluctuating climates want short-term heat, so may use less mass. That's exactly right, Always Learning, and that's a really great observation, and it's one of the things I spoke on last week. We talked about my cook stoves and the bypass, and whether you can bypass how much heat you put into the stove. And so for some people that's an important feature, and for other folks it's not. If you live in New Mexico or somewhere, like you said, a climate that's cold, and then hot in the day, you don't want to heat up that stove. So it's important to have quick, low mass heat up, cool down solutions. Positive Aspect says you can stick CFB back together with fiber blanket glue. So let's move on, you guys. Let's get on to some more questions here, if I can find them. So this was a great one, and this is Tall Shadow. I really appreciated that, this question. So this was about the 5-minute riser, and he says, when wrapping the 1-inch thick blanket to fit in the pipe, the inside face gets wrinkled, and he's wondering about how that will affect the flow with regards to the boundary layer that I was speaking on last week. And he's saying, should a 6-inch riser instead be made 7 or 8-inch to account for this? So the answer is, well, certainly if you're using a 6-inch system, and you're building a 5-minute riser, you certainly want to start with an 8-inch flue because you're going to be putting 1 inch of ceramic wool inside that riser on all sides. So you've reduced your diameter by 2 inches. So if it's an 8-inch pipe and you put in 1 inch wool, you're going to have a 6-inch inside. So I think that's sufficient. I don't think you need to worry about the wrinkles in the fiberboard. And actually, much like a golf ball or other surface tension breaking shapes, the bumpy riser will actually probably flow better and exhibit less boundary layer adhesion. I don't know what you'd call that word. Friction. Than would a smooth layer. Just like smooth, running water over a piece of glass, you can see that surface tension, really sticking it as it peels off the edge, or a curved edge, how it shoots, curves off the edge rather than breaking neatly. So the ripples and the stuff inside the riser there, probably helpful, actually. Your 8-inch flue pipe with a 1-inch chimney inside should still have a 6-inch opening inside, so that should be fine. If those ripples are bad and they're obstructing that 6-inch riser flow, then yeah, I think you want to make it bigger if you can. So, interesting positive aspect. It's cool. That sounds like a good little heater. Heated 3 rooms. And then the next question from Tall Shadow says, is it true that 2 smaller bells will extract more heat than 1 big bell occupying the same room? Well, that's a great question, and it's a really interesting one. And I think that there's probably a whole lot of science that one could go into to break down Doug, you talking about the stream? Is it not streaming well? Oh yeah, I got a bad it says bad. Well, I don't know what to do about it. I'm just going to stick with it and we'll see if it comes back here. But you guys stick with me here. We'll see if it comes back. At any rate, I was going over the 2 bells and 1 bell. Oh, I'm sorry, you guys. It sounds like it does look like I'm having some problems, according to all of you guys. Hopefully it'll come back. Bad buffering delay. Slide it back a little bit. Let me check my modem. Seems to be working. Sorry, you guys. I'm sure it's on my end. I'm still just running on cell phone Wi-Fi, so Wi-Fi's been a challenge for me. But I'm just gonna persevere here, and if we gotta just catch up on the playback, that's what we'll do. Boy, I hope it's working. So at any rate, 2 bells. Will you get more heat into the space as versus the same heater with a single bell? So that's a great question. Tall shadow, lace boundary layer. Yeah, my boundary layers are getting better by the day. I move through the air very, very, very efficiently these days. That's funny. That's great, Tall Shadow. So, I can see your quote, your chat, so maybe you guys can still hear me. So 2 bells, 1 bell, more heat into the space. Which one? Here's my take on it. Let's assume that we're talking about a box of the same external dimensions. If that were a single bell, let me say it the other way around. If that were a double bell, let's say it's a box of the same external dimensions, and in the double bell configuration, it's got a divider, just a single wall divider down the middle of it. Well, in that example, you now have more ISA by the size of that divider times 2 for that flue gas to heat up. So you're going to extract more heat from the flue gas with that double bell configuration. You also have more mass by the size of that divider. So you're going to extract more heat. I'm sorry, I'm getting distracted by my bad stream status. So you're going to extract more heat in the same size because you have more internal surface area. Does more heat get into your room from there? It's a good question. And again, I think it's going to really depend on a whole host of conditions. If you make those double bells so that that internal surface area, is all exposed to your space, then you probably will get more heat into your space. But at the same time, it comes at a reduced chimney temperature, so slower draft, so probably slower heating up. Hey, David Swanson, good to see you. So Belgian, or Tall Shadow, I'm going to say that I don't think there is one answer. I don't think it's yes, it always will, or no, it always won't. I think it's going to depend on how you configure those bells, the size of the heater, the conditions outside, a whole lot of different things, how long you burn it. Some burn cycles are going to favor a lower ISA. Some burn cycles are going to favor more ISA. I don't think there's a right answer. I do feel like multiple bells are almost always going to add more complexity, and they're going to add more chance that you're going to have poor stove function at some point. So I'm not a big fan of them. They make sense in some applications, but until you've built a few of these, you might not realize how dramatic the effect of cooling the gases is. And one little brick box can cool fire exhaust an enormous amount when it's cold. It's surprising. And so it's tempting to build multiple brick boxes and build multiple bells. But each stage you're adding is adding a whole nother cycle, a whole nother stage of stratification, rising warm air, descending cool air, heat going into your mass. You're adding a whole nother cycle to your system. And at some point, that's probably going to bite you in the butt. Whether it's a warm day outside and you're trying to get things started, you'll need more bypasses. We talked about that last week. There's ways to do it. I'm not trying to say don't do double bells, but I am trying to say that I don't know if there's a hard and fast rule to making sure that it's going to be what you want. I don't think it's always going to be better. And my last statement on that is that I don't think that any ISA calculations or anyone else's, experience is going to help you other than to just kind of steer you. But I do go back to one of my, I need to figure out how to put this into a rule or a tenet of rocket mass heater building. And but I think you guys know this about me, is that one of my underlying principles of building a rocket mass heater is you're not going to get it right the first time. Don't try. Don't assume that that's the last. You're going to stack those bricks up and never touch them again. And the reason I'm saying this is because I want to go back to your double bell question, Tall Shadow, and just say that in my opinion, the best way to go would be to build a single bell system and add on to it and tune as you go. Build a modest system you know will work well. Make it bigger as time goes on. Play with different things. Build a bell, put a divider in it, take it apart next year, do it again the other way. Try it in your experience. See how, in your situation, see how it works in your, for your goals in your specific application. So I know that's not a great answer, but I don't think there is a great answer for that question. I don't think there's always going to be a double bell always wins. I don't think you can say that. I'm going to move on here. So Catapult Workshop, welcome. Nice to see you. Hello from the UK, says Catapult Workshop. And would you recommend using a copper cylinder in the Walker boiler instead of a steel drum? Absolutely, Catapult Workshop. That'd be, obviously, in my opinion, I don't mean obvious to you, but in my opinion, that would be the premium choice. For most folks, that's, that can be difficult to source and expensive, but if you have access to it, by all means. Now, the only caveat there is copper's melting point is something like 700 degrees-ish Fahrenheit, 350 or 4 Celsius. I'm just guessing, so don't quote me on that. Someone could look it up. It's somewhere around there. As long as there's water in it at all times, no problem. It'd be hard to boil it dry, without you knowing something was wrong. But that's just the only caveat, is that you just need to make sure it's full of liquid. But I think a copper cylinder would be awesome. It'd be amazing. It'd be wonderful. Highly encouraged. So Robin L says, so if making a somewhat larger barbecue oven than plans, it would be good to fill the empty space between the core and outer brick wall with insulative wool. At oven level, no insulative wool will be needed. No empty space. Just fills the empty space on the first level. Don't have wrinkles, just crinkles. Crinkles are happy wrinkles. I like that, Robin. So, Robin, I'm not sure if I understand your question. This is the barbecue oven. So we've got the core and the oven. And the empty space between the core. Because your lower section is going to have to get bigger to hold up the bigger upper section, and it's going to be a gap around the core. That's what I got you. You can tell me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure I got you. So a couple thoughts there. Insulation would be great around the core to increase efficiency, and it would increase startup times. Overall, it would just make the thing come up to temp faster and burn hotter. That's a good thing. But you could also go the other direction. You could also double up like the red brick thickness down at those levels, and you would just be adding more mass down low, and you would get longer heat cycle out of that. So either or. Now, in most rocket stove cores, we always want to insulate around the core, but in that barbecue oven, I found that it didn't seem to make a huge difference one way or the other, because I was using those heavy fire brick splits for the core. In that case, it's not a very insulated core anyway, so that insulation out around the outside didn't make a huge difference. So you can make that a choice, whether you want to increase your mass and increase your thermal storage, or whether you want to reduce your mass around the core and increase your startup times and efficiency and burning temperatures. It would also probably drive your oven temperatures a little higher, because you'd have a little bit less of a heat soak underneath that you would have with the more mass. So hopefully that helps. Robin, I'm so glad you're here. This is exactly, this is what I was really hoping for with the stove chat. All of this, you guys, to have you guys here asking questions about theory and overall guiding concepts, but then also to be able to help you with your specific builds. So really, really glad to have you guys here. Thank you for the great questions. So Always Learning says, Aprovecho years ago experimented with putting a smaller diameter inner insulated bell to force the hot exhaust to be in contact with the exterior shell for greater heat extraction. Yeah, exactly. That's the original, even Ianto's Rocket Mass Heater book. They were using large riser constructions. I think in his book it was just fire brick, right? So it had a thick wall. But part of that goal was, it would push the channels on the outside to smaller sizes, so you would have less gap there, and it would ideally run that, down that metal bell and give more exterior shell heat extraction. Now, I'm going to go back and say that now that I know what I used to buy into that theory, now that I know what I know, I'm not 100% sure that really plays much of a role. the restricted path would speed flue gases along a little bit more than a more open path. But at the same time, a more open path will allow the gases to kind of dwell and give off more of their heat to that radiator. So I'm not totally convinced that it would give you more heat extraction, although it would probably run hotter, but it might be running hotter and giving you less extraction actually, because it's passing through there so quickly and it's passing by a hotter skin that's already extracted. In other words, you have less delta T, won't extract as much. So two different theories there. Both are probably accurate at different times of a burn. And again, those minutiae, as we've come to find out, I don't feel that they're that important. The ISAs and the, for me, the gaps just need to be big enough. I have never found much of an advantage. People used to talk about like the riser gap, wanting it to be small. Never noticed anything but downsides to pinching that off. So I think that we've all experimented with those things, but for the most part, adequate flow is most important, and anything more than that usually is beneficial within the confines of the stove. So, Sally Mafari, nice to see ya. No broken video audio, everyone seems to be getting it. So, I think I'm just not having a good stream today. We've got some weird weather. I don't know if that does it at all. So, Sally Mafari says, doesn't the way a bell or thermal mass work key around conservation of heat? Yes, Sally Mafari, it does. That's the whole idea behind it, is that we're trying to conserve the heat that we made. And there are a lot of factors involved in terms of materials that are used, surface area, delta T in between different sides, humidity. I mean, there's just a ton of factors involved, but the basic principle is just conversion or conservation of heat within thermal mass. That's all there is to it. And that's, in my mind, it's a fundamental principle of heating ourselves with solid fuel that is lost in a lot of our culture of box stoves. That's what we've always known. We took the mass kind of out of our experience, and I think it was a huge mistake. I don't think mass is a special case. I think mass is kind of always the best case. I mean, whether we're heating the air in our cars when we're driving, or whatever, we almost always use mass in other situations. In those cases, we're using the fluid, our coolant as the mass. So we almost always do, but for whatever reason, in our wood heating culture, we've forgotten it. And Trance says, what about the triple bell? Let me break it down for you, too, Trance. It's all about the cosine of the... I have no idea. You know exactly what I mean. And actually, that does bring me... Triple bell is actually a great illustration of something I talked about with the double bell, is that if you've ever built these multiple bells, which I have with my half-barrel system, it was really fun. You could just kind of add a bell to a system, add a bell. And what you'll find is that the drag on a system is exponential with each subsequent, with each next bell that you add, because you're adding that whole other cycle, like I said. So yeah, I know you were just kidding around too, Trance, but I just wanted to say that if you ever want to play with those things, you can just add barrel after barrel after barrel and see how much of a load you put on the system with each one. It's shocking what a difference it makes on the temperature of your exhaust temps and the overall load it puts on the system. So Sally Mufari says copper is antibacterial, where things can grow in stainless, and corrosion resistant. And yeah, no, absolutely. Copper, like I said, so many great reasons to use it. I built mine with those drums because they're salvage materials, so they're free and usable. But they will rust, and it isn't a forever solution, that steel bell. I think the copper chamber would be a forever solution. I don't see any reason why that would ever deteriorate to the point of needing to replace it unless you have some issues with your water. But so let's see. I'm gonna try to. I almost wonder if one of the issues I'm having is that I have my email open. I should probably close it. I'll just get back to these questions. If I can find the last question. There was one more set of questions. No, I guess I got all my email questions that I can see anyways. Find them easily. I'm going to close my email. Maybe that'll help the stream. So Augustus says, I saw an older CAD version of my riserless plan that had a taller chamber immediately after the firebox. Augustus, yeah. So that is the original riserless core that is built out of insulated fire brick. And that chamber is sort of a function of the way the bricks come together. It is, we talked about a little bit, I think last week, I talked about how there was an old fellow who made a stove that had a big hump, a camel's hump in the middle of his J-tube, and he called it the capacitor. And so that little bit of elevated cathedral ceiling kind of right there, right before that last port, I think does add another mixing element and a little bit of a heat, conservation area, as I'd say. Like it's getting super hot there to help combust the last of those gases. But when I made the ceramic fiberboard core, which is the next iteration, so you have to remember I built that brick one first. That was the first one, and then I continued to test to try and get it smaller and be able to be built in other with the ceramic fiberboard to fit these stove designs. So you don't see that in the ceramic fiberboard shape because it didn't turn out to be necessary. It's in that brick only shape because, like I said, it's a function of those large bricks and the way they come together to form that shape. So there's that. And Sally Mufari says, any thought on using heat exchange for a glycol-filled radiant heat system? It's Sally Mufari, as far as I'm concerned, it's the same as any other hydronic heating system. I think it's a great way to go. If you can swing it, of course, it's, you're just adding a little bit of complexity to your system in terms of more materials and exotic stuff, to put inside there. But of course, it offers better function, right? It's a higher boiling point, and you could transfer much more heat. Every degree you can get above 212 is that much more heat, you're going to be able to put into the house. So, yeah, it would be a great way to go, for sure. When I talk about, so I often am not going to suggest, and don't get me wrong, when you guys suggest them, I'm all about them. But in my discussions and in my plans and in my, trying to educate people, I'm not usually going to suggest those top tier ultimate options, because I think that that's one of the things that one of my goals is to try and make these things as approachable to everybody. So I'm going to use the 40-cent red clay brick and the salvage drum, and absolutely encourage people that if you can, build it out of soapstone, build it with a copper tub, build it with a glycol heat transfer. Those are all going to be the premium options for sure. So great questions. By all means, I encourage you to do those things if you can. But I think you'll have great results if you can't. And I don't think they're worth agonizing over, in my opinion. For most of us, a copper reservoir is just going to be out of reach. You'd have to have it custom built. And it'd be thousands of dollars here, at least in my opinion. Even commercially made copper, things of that size are hundreds of dollars. So. But it would be great. It's a great choice. So Positive Aspect says, still searching for the elusive copper water tank. We have them here in Oz, but I've yet to find one. UK used to use immersion heater tanks made from copper lot. Exactly. Like if you can find one salvage, man, it's the best way to go. But at the same time, I'm going to say that the way I designed my boiler, I can take that top off in a matter of minutes. So for me to swap out my tank, every few years, it's not a big deal to me. I'd love to have a copper one, but just saying that it's not the end of the world. And copper is more common there as well. And Sally Mufari, the stills and the brewery suppliers, that's where we'll find them here as well. And that was kind of what originally put me off to the cost, because I used to do a whole lot of distillation. I was very into growing my own plums and making my own Slivovitz and all that stuff. And I looked into those copper stills, and boy, they're expensive. And so Sally Mufari says, I first got interested in rockets via the Eastern European masonry stoves, but those weigh so much. So that's exactly right, man. That that's one of the beauties of the rocket stove masonry heaters is they're so much more approachable, you know, by us regular folks. We can build them ourselves. We can put them in regular size homes. You don't need, my first experience with a masonry heater was at a boyhood friend's vacation home in Sun Valley, Idaho. So you can imagine what that was like. It was 1989. They had this vacation home built in Sun Valley. They were cable TV magnets from the Pacific Northwest. And the house was built starting with the central core of soapstone. It was an enormous masonry heater. And even back then, I think I remember them telling me that thing was like $250,000 or something like that, just for the stonework that started the house. So, that's one of the things. Sally Mufari, you make a great point. Rocket mass heaters are so much more accessible than those, but we still can have the comforts of our own masonry heater. So, that's my take on that. So all right, you guys. Well, I'm still getting a bad stream status, and we've been going for about an hour. So unless you guys have any more questions, I think I'll probably wind it down now, and we can hope for better internet next week. I can also slow down my bit rate. I have been trying to run at this higher bit rate. I know that on the playbacks it looks a lot better, but if it's going to stream poorly, then I won't do it. I remember one more question, and I will be going away here, but one more. Oh, with copper, should you have a sacrificial anode? Asked the Carpenter family. Ooh, boy. Carpenter family. It's a great question. I don't know the answer. So as you guys probably know, I build boats for a living. I have a galvanic corrosion certification. I can tell you, I could talk your ear off about sacrificial anodes. That is how I make my living. I could talk your ear off about them in a saltwater marine setting, but copper in an isolated water loop, I don't know the answer. My gut feeling is no, you probably wouldn't need to worry about it unless, God, I don't know, because you do have a path to ground, right? It's the water is going to be a path to ground anytime you're filling or unfilling. It's a tough question. I think Carpenter family, the only way to find out would be to run it for yourself and start looking for corrosion. If you start to see green fuzz, then you need some kind of sacrificial anode. With copper, I don't know what that anode would be. You'd need to be more noble, more base. At any rate, I'm going to leave that question to someone smarter, but it's a good question. And I did want to come back really quick. Someone asked me about baffles for the bypass. Does it need to be heavy steel? It doesn't. Anything past the riser, for the most part, is going to hold up. You won't really hit those steel melting temps. So that's just a quick answer. So Positive Aspect says anodes are used when there are metal types that fight each other. Cause those are science words. Copper and brass together are fine. Copper and steel are not good and need an anode. Right. So, and Sally McFire says, where are you using the copper? But that's the biggest question, is where are you using the copper? You always, you guys, we're gonna go around in circles on this one. It's a big one. So you know what? Why don't we let's leave it here, and Sally Mafari is digging into it. I think that it's a great question. Actually, it's one that maybe we should dig a little deeper into. I don't know the answer in terms of home domestic water systems. I know that in all of my marine coolers and everything else, we always have them. We have solid paths to ground. I think a lot of our water heating rocket stove systems are going to be closed loops, and so it may not be as important. You do have differential metals. Yeah, I don't know. Wow, copper cylinders are around 50 pounds used in the UK for 900 millimeters by 450 millimeters. Wow, Catapult Workshop, that is amazing. That is a great deal. That's a 900 millimeters by 450 millimeters. That's awesome. Man, those must be old, like old the liners out of old water heaters, huh? That's killer. What a great deal. Absolutely. Highly recommend using that. I'm going to have to start looking around a little more. I think most of our water heaters here are cast iron inside, which also wouldn't be a bad choice, actually. But I'm going to have to look into that and see what I can find, because that's a hot tip right there, if we can salvage copper cylinders. I haven't done, much looking into that, to be honest. So, and I will. I'll look into the corrosion and the cathode and anode situation with regards to the copper water heating systems. I'll look into that a little bit this week, and maybe you guys will too. We can have a little more discussion on that next week. That's a great topic, Carpenter family. Thanks for bringing that up. So I think we can go around in circles. Sally Mufari says, might have to look into boiler tech here so you don't spring a leak in a material transition. Pressure management is necessary. Yeah, Sally Mafari, exactly. Material transition is going to be an issue, right? That's what we're talking about between the two different materials. If you go from copper to steel, you're going to have an issue. Copper through rubber hose to steel on the other end, maybe not an issue if we don't have any electrical issues going through there. So if it's a closed loop in a boat, that can be an issue. If you have stray current, it may not be an issue in a water heater. We might have to look into it. In terms of pressure management, my goal with my boilers is to have no pressurized areas within our system. I would prefer to run open air buffer tanks, and if you must have pressurized domestic hot water, have that pressurized through an external open air buffer tank that's heated from the boiler. So I'd ideally have no pressurized systems, because that definitely also can change the way corrosion manifests. So anyways, that's enough for today, you guys. Let's get back together next week and do it again. I really appreciate all you guys. Great questions, great chat. I apologize for the bad quality on the stream. Hopefully that won't be the same deal every week. We've been doing pretty good, so we'll come back and try again next week. But man, thank you guys so much for all your questions, for all your support, for listening and watching every week. Keep them coming. Keep emailing me. Show up here if you got a build going on. Let's talk about it. Send me your pictures. One of these days, when we slow down on questions, we'll do some looking at builds. Maybe I'll just set aside an episode and just not take questions, and we'll look at some pictures for a while. But in the meantime, you guys keep thinking up this good stuff, keep building stoves, and I'll come back next week and we'll check in with you. So Catapult Workshop says, just using the copper tank as a heating vessel, water will continually flow through 25 feet of copper pipe. So I'm 5 minutes behind you guys. Yeah, okay. So I'm going to check out now, and your guys' chat is going to just have to catch up with me. But we'll pick this up next week. Hopefully I'll have a good stream. Let's pick up the water heating chat and the corrosion chat. And man, thank you guys. It's been a great stream this week, and I really appreciate you guys all being here. Sorry for the troubles. I'm going to stop it now because it's frustrating me that the stream is not going so bad. But yes, David, I did see your pictures, so hopefully we'll have a chance to look at those sometime soon. All right, you guys, have a great day, have a great week, and I will catch you guys next time. I'm going to run the video now, and we'll see you next week, all right? See you guys.